In the upscale Dallas, Texas suburb of Rowlett, the Routier family was living the American dream. Husband Darren owned a thriving computer business. Darlie, his wife, was a vivacious stay-at-home mom to 3 young children, Devon, Damon, and Drake.
As a mother, she was just, you know, she just taught me to be a better grandmother because, you know, she would take time to sit down and do crafts with the boys. And she took them to the movies, which was usually every Saturday. Her and Darren would take them. They were allowed to bring all their friends.
Then one black night in June, the Routiers' family was changed forever.
911, what is your emergency? Ma'am?
June 6, 1996, about 2:30 in the morning, we received a call, screaming, hysterical woman reporting that her children had been stabbed and that she had been stabbed.
Within minutes, the first patrol car arrived at the Routier home.
Ma'am, they're on their way.
There was a lot of confusion, chaos. The first responding officer was having difficulty communicating with Darlie. She had some injuries.
Her sons, Devon and Damon, were on the living room floor, drenched in pools of their own blood.
It was quite obvious to the responding officers that the children were either dead or almost, one of them was in the process of expiring. It was a horrendous scene. They'd been stabbed multiple times. There was blood everywhere.
As more patrol cars and ambulances arrived at the Routier home, a neighbor alerted Darlie's mother.
I was called by the nurse who lived across the street at 3 a.m. and she was crying that something terrible had happened and I had to get there. And then immediately we got everybody together. It was like seeing the house in the movie, the great big house, only spotlights on it, 40 or 50 people outside, and all these cops and paramedics just running in and out of the front door, just total chaos all over the place.
The ambulances rushed Darlie and 2 of her sons to the hospital. Darlie was barely hanging on to life. Her 2 young sons, however, were both dead. Darlie was taken into surgery with a slashed throat and a severe knife wound on her arm.
The surgeon talked to me and told me just how close she came to dying, that it was within 1 millimeter of her carotid artery, and he clearly told me the wound to her arm was a defense wound and that it went to the bone.
Meanwhile, Rowlett police secured the scene. Darlie had told police she saw the intruder go out the pantry door. Investigators searched the property looking for clues.
They went through the garage and they went out through the laundry room, which is the area that Darlie said the intruder left. They got into the garage and they couldn't see an obvious way to exit this garage. They saw the screen that was cut, but they continued their investigation. They went out into the backyard. They checked the fence briefly. There were no scuff marks. There were no footprints in the flower beds. But when they went to open the gate, it stuck. It was very hard to open. And after forcing the gate open, they stepped into the driveway. At that time, a security light went on. If somebody had passed through there, that light would have been on before those officers set it off.
Baffled by what was not at the scene, police questioned Darlie as soon as she came out of surgery. Darlie and her 2 older sons had been sleeping in the living room. She had been awakened by someone attacking her with a knife. Darlie fought for her life. Her assailant escaped through the kitchen door.
Very early on in the case, conflicting information was coming out. Darlie would tell one story that didn't match up with something that was seen in the physical evidence. Starting with the 911 call, she made a mention that there's a knife here, and the communications officer told her, don't touch it. And she made a very lucid, calm, rather unsettling statement back to the communications officer, well, I've already touched it, maybe you could have gotten prints off of it. That is not something that you would expect from a woman in Darlie's situation.
Faced with such a confusing story, Rowlett police called in a 40-year veteran crime scene investigator. suddenly, the facts surrounding this tragic double murder changed dramatically.
It's pretty obvious about 30 minutes into the scene that I felt like someone in the house committed the offense, not an intruder. Because evidence is sort of a silent witness. Evidence is there, and it's incumbent upon the investigators to find the evidence, analyze it, and put it to its correct use.
Investigators began comparing the physical evidence to Darlie's statements.
I know they absolutely did not think it was Darlie, and they thought it was Darren because he was kept away from us, and he was not injured.
He had awakened to Darlie's screams and rushed downstairs to discover the gruesome scene. They found his story matched the evidence they had so far.
Darlie had told me that she was laying on the sofa, and that at this time that she was fighting with this stranger, and that the stranger had cut her throat. Well, if he's cutting her throat while she's laying on the sofa, then this blood is going to run this direction across her chest. But the way we found that blood on her t-shirt, all of it ran down, which means she had to be standing up.
As the investigation continued, police became convinced Darlie had murdered her sons and staged her own injuries.
I found her to be a liar. Every time, she'd tell me a story, the story was different. She said that the reason why she was sleeping downstairs is because the youngest child, who was an infant, was asleep in the baby bed upstairs. She said she'd wake up if that baby would roll over, but yet she didn't wake up while her two children were being stabbed.
Adding more suspicion to Darlie's tale, the blood evidence at the scene did not match Darlie's version of events.
We also found her barefooted footprints under the kitchen sink. What she also told me is that she had never went to the kitchen sink. She always went to the right side of that kitchen island.
A thorough investigation of the kitchen revealed that the knife used in the attack came from the Routier's kitchen. Using the chemical luminol, evidence revealed that someone had used the sink to wash off blood. Would an intruder wash up before he went rushing out the back door? Or would someone trying to hide the evidence resort to a rushed cleanup detail?
The physical evidence is talking to us, and it's telling us that Darlie killed her children. That's the worst case scenario that we were faced with. But you've got to go where the evidence leads you.
The evidence was clear to the Rowlett investigating team. 10 days after the brutal death of her two young sons, Darlie Routier was arrested as the killer of her two kids.
There is nothing inside of her capable of doing this crime, ever. She couldn't have snapped. You don't snap and then snap back. That's impossible.
It doesn't happen that people just snap and do something out of character, but it does happen that people who were good can change and do evil things.
This crime was committed by Darlie Routier. All the physical evidence tells us that she did it. The jury gave her death sentence for it.
Although she continues to sit on death row in Texas, Darlie Routier and her family hope that she's proven innocent. But regardless, they don't believe she'll be put to death.
They made a mistake and they won't owe up to it in Texas.
Darlie and her family may be correct. According to Victor L. Stribe, professor of law at Ohio Northern University, current statistics show that of the women sentenced to death row, only 10% of them are actually executed.
When I hear someone saying that they were innocent, I take that very seriously because I don't hear it very often.
Will new evidence convince the courts that she is not the cold-blooded murderer the police claim?
Unless someone steps in and rights this terrible wrong, Darlie is going to die.
Darlie Routier is one of 53 women sitting on death row. She was convicted of the brutal murders of her two young sons. Darlie claims an intruder broke into her home and stabbed her sleeping sons to death. She also contends that the injuries she sustained are the result of a struggle with the real murderer. The Rowlett Police Department said the evidence proved otherwise.
We proved beyond a reasonable doubt with the prosecuting attorneys, the district attorney's office. We presented this case in front of a jury. The jury listened closely to that information, and they rendered a verdict.
While convicted of killing her children, her family contends she's innocent and believes the investigation was botched from the beginning by the Rowlett Police Department.
Somebody broke into the house. Somebody killed her kids, and then the police couldn't get enough evidence to point to someone else, so they turned it all towards Darlie.
When they put the target on you, it doesn't matter if proof comes in that you're innocent. They stay and focus on what they know was right from day one.
Outraged by the horrific crime, author Barbara Davis attended the trial as research for her book about the case, Precious Angels, which claimed that without a doubt, Darlie Routier was guilty of savagely murdering her 2 young sons.
I believe Darlie was guilty because I stayed at the trial for 5 weeks and attended every day and watched the evidence that was presented to the jury, and they convinced me beyond any doubt that she had done this crime.
Days after the publication of her book, Davis was given a copy of the crime scene photographs. To Ms. Davis' shock and surprise, not all the photos were shown to the jury.
Well, there were pictures that were published to the jury and pictures that were not. And there were 200, maybe 300 photographs in which they were all entered into evidence. But there were maybe 6 or 7 that were posted on a board in the courtroom where everyone could see them.
In a moment that remains one of the most dramatic of her life, Ms. Davis realized that these photographs put a whole other spin on the Routier case.
I had moments of eureka when I saw evidence after evidence that had not been presented in the trial.
After carefully studying the police photographs taken of the scene, she now believes there were life-changing mistakes made in the investigation, beginning with Darlie's wounds from the attack.
These 2 photographs are really important. They're the ones that indicate to me somebody was holding her down. This one again is of the arm, and these are the backs of her hands, which indicate they're defensive in nature. These photographs were never shown to the jury.
Darlie's appeal lawyer, Stephen Cooper, also believes the police bungled the case and ignored standard crime scene procedure.
There's videotape showing the collection of evidence where they're stuffing bloody clothing all in the same bag, where there's cross-contamination. I mean, it's a horrible idea.
All the evidence at the scene showed that Darlie Routier killed her 2 sons. There was no contradicting evidence. There was no signs of any supposed intruder.
This is a massive crime scene with blood all over the place, fingerprints and blood, and none of this evidence had been analyzed, evaluated.
Davis and Cooper are quick to point out there are many pieces of evidence that support Darlie's version of events. They believe evidence exists that proves Darlie Routier did not kill her children.
They're fingerprints, but they're fingerprints in blood, which means someone who was there in that home that night made that fingerprint. They don't match the boys, they don't match Darlie or Darren, and they don't match any of the medical personnel or law enforcement personnel that was there. It means they match whoever was in that house that escaped.
Other evidence that points to an intruder are a cut screen in the garage and a sock with Devon's blood found in an alley 3 houses away.
Number 2, the screen was cut the whole length of the screen in a T, and we heard all these things in the paper saying that it appeared to be cut from the inside, but when we got to the trial, a whole different story, because under oath they had to admit it was cut from the outside.
And here's the sock that was found with both boys' blood, a spot of it, and Darlie's DNA. It's 3 yards down in the backyard.
What sense would it make for my daughter to take a sock 75 yards down the alley?
Directly across from where that sock was found was a butcher knife, very close size and shape to the one that was used to injure Darlie and to kill Damon. And it was buried in the ground up to the handle. The police saw this the night they were investigating, and they made the decision that it wasn't a piece of evidence, it was simply a digging tool, and he didn't disturb it, didn't take it in for test. And when the trial was going to start about 6 or 7 months later, the DA's office sent him back to retrieve it.
Darlie Routier's supporters continue to pose one simple question. If the jury had heard about all the evidence police investigators dismissed, would they have had reasonable doubt and acquitted Darlie Routier?
Darlie's totally innocent of this. They've never shown any motive.
Appeals for a new trial drag on as Darlie sits on death row, waiting for her death warrant to be signed. On the advice of her attorney, Darlie will no longer speak about her case outside of the courtroom. While they continue to hope for the best, her supporters and family live with the fact Darlie may never be freed.
It's taken over my life. You wake up in the morning thinking about it, because what they've done is they've taken a young mother who was a victim and put her in there and taken her life away from her and her children's life and her family's life.
The life of a woman on death row in Texas means isolation from the general prison population. She is not allowed to go out of her cell except for an hour a day.
Darlie's adjusted as well as any individual possibly could. She had her 2 boys taken from her, and then they turn around and they take her other son from her.
The night of the murders, Darlie's youngest son, Drake, was sleeping safely upstairs.
They're victimizing Drake, who's now 9 years old and only sees his mother through glass.
Living on death row means Darlie cannot hug or touch her family.
The state of Texas doesn't allow any contact visits for death row inmates. She can put her hand against his hand through the glass, and that's as close as they've been since he was 8 months old. It's difficult to think about all the things that have changed since Darlie's been in prison. She's missed out on, Drake's first day of school. She missed all the Easter egg hunts, all his Halloween costumes.
All these things she's missed because they made a mistake and they won't owe up to it in Texas. She said that if she dies, that she will be with her boys, so she'll be okay. But she's fighting because that's not what the truth is, and that's not what Devon and Damon would want her to do. They would want her to fight for the truth.
I don't know who did it, but I know Darlie didn't. Unless someone steps in and rights this terrible wrong, Darlie is going to die. She's not going to be executed. She's going to be murdered for something she didn't do. And she's sitting there today on death row waiting for justice to catch up with her.
We know that we're speaking for 2 dead little boys, and we're the last voice that they have. They have lost every legal challenge that they have put forth. We proved beyond a reasonable doubt Darlie Routier killed those children, and she was exactly where she needs to be right now on death row.
Look at the bare, hard facts. You can see, there's so much that you can see that I didn't do this.
When I hear someone saying that they were innocent, I take that very seriously because I don't hear it very often. What you hear a little bit more often is that the circumstances are not what they're made out to be, and often that is true.
Within minutes, the first patrol car arrived at the Routier home.
They're on their way.
There was a lot of confusion, chaos. The first responding officer was having difficulty communicating with Darlie. She had some injuries.
Her sons, Devon and Damon, were on the living room floor, drenched in pools of their own blood.
It was quite obvious to the responding officers that the children were either dead or almost.
Drake.
As a mother, she was just, she just taught me to be a better grandmother because, she would take time to sit down and do crafts with the boys. And she took them to the movies, which was usually every Saturday. Her and Darren would take them. They were allowed to bring all their friends.
Then one black night in June, the Routiers' family was changed forever.
One of them was in the process of expiring. It was a horrendous scene. They'd been stabbed multiple times. There was blood everywhere.
As more patrol cars and ambulances arrived at the Routier home, a neighbor alerted Darlie's mother.
I was called by the nurse who lived across the street at 3 a.m. and she was crying that something terrible had happened and I had to get there.
In the upscale Dallas, Texas suburb of Rowlett, the Routier family was living the American dream. Husband Darren owned a thriving computer business. Darlie, his wife, was a vivacious stay-at-home mom to 3 young children, Devon, Damon, and...
Ma'am?
June 6, 1996, about 2:30 in the morning, we received a call, screaming, hysterical woman reporting that her children had been stabbed and that she had been stabbed.
It's a 911 medical emergency.